I told my own daughter I'd be at her wedding. She told me to stay home, said I'd embarrass her, said it flat, over a caterer's contract, without even looking up. $38,000 sat in an account with my name on it. Nobody at that table knew it yet. A future mother-in-law kept talking about keeping the day looking a certain way. My daughter thought love was a line item, something she could cross out, and I said nothing. I drove home. By the next morning, I'd made one phone call. It would empty a wedding venue 3 days before the flowers arrived. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. And then the banker looked up from the folder and said the 6 words that ended it. Let me take you back. You are not walking down that aisle, Mom. Preston's family already thinks we're too much. I need you to just stay home, Camille said. She didn't look up from her phone. The caterer's contract sat open on the kitchen table between us. I set my coffee cup down slow. Careful, the way I used to set down a chart at the nurse's station after a rough shift. The way you put something down when you already know it might break. The kitchen went quiet, just the refrigerator humming, a mockingbird working through its whole repertoire outside the window over the sink. Excuse me? I said. I mean it in the nicest way I can. Camille finally looked up. She had her father's eyes, that same steady brown. It made the moment worse instead of better. Deborah already thinks the wedding is going to look a certain way. I don't need you making a scene. You know how you get. How I get. You get loud, Mom. You get opinions. Preston's family isn't like that. 54 years old. And my only daughter had just told me, in my own kitchen, at my own table, that my presence was a liability to manage. I picked my coffee back up. I drank the rest slow, on purpose. The way I'd learned to drink coffee through anything. Through double shifts, through my husband's funeral, through 17 years of raising a girl alone in a house that never once missed a payment. Then I set the cup in the sink, rinsed it, and said, "This is good coffee, isn't it?" Nobody answered. I did not raise my voice that morning. I did not cry. I told Camille to have a good day at work, kissed her on the cheek at the door, reminded her the choir was singing at 3 if she wanted to stop by. Then I got in my car. I drove the 11 minutes home to Sunset Drive. I sat in the driveway for 4 minutes with the engine off before I went inside. I had lived on Sunset Drive for 28 years, longer than I had lived anywhere else in my whole life. Ardmore, on the west side of Winston-Salem. A street of craftsman bungalows and crepe myrtles old enough to arch over the sidewalk in June. I knew which neighbors kept dogs. I knew which ones kept to themselves. I knew Miss Odessa Pruitt, 2 doors down, watered her azaleas at 6 every morning like it was a job God himself had assigned her. I had raised Camille alone in that house, mostly. My husband, Walter Ashby, worked the furniture plant off Peters Creek Parkway, a foreman with sawdust always somewhere in his collar. A laugh you could hear through 2 closed doors. His heart gave out at 43. Camille was 11. After that, it was me and a grieving girl and a mortgage. A charge nurse job on the pediatric floor at Forsyth Medical, paying enough if I took every night shift they'd give me. 28 years I clocked in at 7 p.m., clocked out at 7 a.m. 28 years of vending machine coffee, other people's worst nights passing under fluorescent light, croup and fevers, the particular hush of a children's ward at 4 in the morning, when everything finally goes quiet. I never missed a mortgage payment. I put Camille through UNC Greensboro on my own overtime, and 2 scholarships she had worked hard to earn. I was proud of that hard work. I rarely said it out loud. Saying it out loud felt like keeping score. I did not keep score with my own child. I was good in a crisis. Almost nobody outside that hospital ever properly credited it. I could read a room the way some nurses read a monitor. A mother's shaking hands, a father's too calm voice, a child's cry that meant something different than it sounded like. Once, near the end of my career, a young mother came screaming into triage. She was carrying a toddler who'd swallowed something off the kitchen counter. Two other nurses reached for protocol binders. I was already kneeling at the woman's eye level, voice low, even, walking her through exactly what came next, breath by breath, until the shaking stopped enough for her to actually hear the instructions. The child was fine. Nobody remembered my name in the chaos afterward. I never expected them to. That was me. Soft voice, sharp mind. A woman who had never once needed to raise either to be believed. In the hall closet, inside a plastic filing box behind the winter coats, there was a manila folder. Camille had read the first page once, 8 months ago. She'd nodded like she understood. She never asked to see the rest. She did not know what the third clause said. She thought it was just paperwork I liked to keep. Organized, dated, filed, in case somebody someday needed proof of something. I thought about that folder standing in my kitchen that morning, coffee cup draining in the rack, the mockingbird still going outside. Stay home, you get loud, you get opinions. I was 54 years old. I'd raised that girl alone, on a nurse's salary, for 28 years, and it had earned me a seat at home instead of a seat at the wedding. I thought about Walter. I still did that some mornings. 17 years gone, and I still reached for his side of the closet before I caught myself. He used to say things at that same kitchen table, half joking, half not. The kind of thing you don't understand until decades later. Money sat between us on a stack of unpaid bills the month before he died. He looked at me over his reading glasses. "Don't you ever let anybody spend our name without inviting us into the room, Renata. Not even our own blood." I hadn't understood it then. 26 years old with an infant on my hip. I understood it now. I remembered the day we buried him. A close, humid August afternoon at Evergreen Cemetery. Half the plant floor showed up in ill-fitting suits. Sawdust-scarred hands folded around hymnals they didn't use often. Camille wore a black dress 2 sizes too big so she could grow into it. She gripped my hand at the graveside hard enough to leave marks. 11 years old. Too young to understand why the ground was opening up to take her father. I had promised him, standing over that grave, that Camille would never want for anything I could provide. I had kept that promise for 17 years. I never once told my daughter the cost of keeping it. I went upstairs that morning, past the choir robes hanging in the spare room, past the framed photo of Walter at the plant on his last birthday. I pulled the plastic filing box out from behind the winter coats. I didn't open the folder. I already knew what was in it. I just needed to touch it. The way you touch a railing on a staircase you already know by heart, just to remember it's still there. Reverend Saul Whitaker had planted the idea 8 months back, standing in the church parking lot after a Wednesday service, watching me load a box of hymnals into my trunk. He told me about a woman 2 congregations over, a widow like me. She had paid for her son's whole wedding, then found herself uninvited from the reception once the checks cleared, replaced at the head table by a mother-in-law with better real estate. "Baby," he'd said, "love your children with your whole heart. Just don't hand them the whole heart signed, sealed, and undeliverable." I'd laughed it off in the parking lot. I hadn't laughed it off in my car afterward. 2 weeks later, I called Marcus Odom. He'd handled Walter's small estate 17 years ago. He'd stayed a family friend ever since, sung tenor in my choir most Christmas Eves. I asked him a simple question, not whether I should give my daughter the wedding money. I'd already decided that. The question was how to give it in a way nobody could quietly rewrite once the check cleared. Marcus drew up something simple, a conditional gift agreement. It released the wedding fund in 3 installments, each one tied to a specific milestone. The final and largest installment tied plainly to the guest list, including, by name, me, Renata Colleen Ashby. Camille signed it without much of a second look. The way you sign anything a parent hands you when you're 26 and planning a wedding, and your mother is the one writing checks. She skimmed the first paragraph. She saw the number. She signed. She had never gone back and read Clause 3. I put the box back behind the winter coats. I went to choir rehearsal at 3, like I'd told Camille I would. I stood at the front of the youth choir. 19 years now I'd been directing that group of teenagers. They couldn't hold a note in September. They could bring a congregation to tears by Easter. I ran them through the same hymn twice because the sopranos kept rushing the bridge. I did not tell a single person in that room what had happened at my kitchen table. I smiled at the right places. I corrected pitch. I thanked the pianist and locked the fellowship hall on my way out, same as always. It was only in the car, alone again, that I let myself think the sentence all the way through. My daughter did not want me at her own wedding. My daughter's future mother-in-law thought there was a certain way the day needed to look. My face, apparently, did not fit that picture. And somewhere in a hall closet, behind a row of winter coats, sat a folder my daughter had signed and never finished reading. A folder that made every dollar of that $38,000 final balance conditional on one very specific thing. I did not know yet, that evening, exactly what I was going to do. I only knew this. Driving home past the crepe myrtles on Sunset Drive, windows down, radio off, I was done being surprised by what my family assumed I would simply absorb. I had absorbed enough. I had been absorbing things quietly for 28 years. Tomorrow, I decided, I would go see Yolanda at the bank. Not to be angry, not to make a scene, the very thing Camille had accused me of being liable to do. Just to ask one calm question about an account with my name on it, and to find out exactly what that manila folder already knew before anyone else in this family found a reason to forget it. Yolanda Briggs had worked the Stratford Road branch of Truist for 11 years. In 9 of those years, she had never once seen me raise my voice about anything. Not a fee, not a hold. Not the time a teller misfiled a deposit and cost me 3 days of interest. So when I walked in that Tuesday morning, calm as ever, folder tucked under one arm, and asked to review the wedding fund. All of it, please. Yolanda pulled up a private room. She didn't ask a single follow-up question. Some customers you learn to read. Me, calm as still water, was usually the one you needed to watch closest. Everything looks exactly the way we set it up, Yolanda said, scrolling through the account history. First installment released in March, second in May. Both went through clean. The final balance, $38,000, is sitting right here. Earmarked. Cashier's check ready the day before the wedding, like the schedule says. And the schedule, I said. Remind me exactly what it requires. Yolanda glanced at the folder already open on the table between us. I hadn't needed to open it. I knew every word inside it. I just wanted to hear somebody else say it out loud. Somebody whose job was to be exact about money and nothing else. Clause 3, Yolanda read. Final installment release is expressly conditioned upon written confirmation that the donor, Renata Colleen Ashby, remains a named and invited guest at the ceremony and reception in question. Should this condition fail at any point prior to disbursement, the donor retains sole and unilateral authority to cancel any outstanding instrument tied to this agreement. She looked up. Ms. Ashby, is there a problem with the guest list? I folded my hands on the table. The same posture I used at a family's bedside, right before saying something a parent didn't want to hear. There is. I told Yolanda plainly what happened at my kitchen table the morning before. Not with heat, not with drama. The way I used to give a report at shift change. Facts in order, nothing embellished. Embellishment was for people who weren't sure the facts spoke loud enough on their own. Yolanda didn't say much while I talked. When I finished, she sat back and exhaled slowly through her nose. Ms. Ashby, I've watched your accounts for 9 years. I've never once heard you raise your voice, not even the time we lost your direct deposit for a week. But I want you to know something, one professional to another. What your daughter did isn't just unkind. It's the exact scenario this document was written to survive. I know, I said. That's rather the point of it. Do you want to cancel the check now or wait? I thought about that question longer than Yolanda expected. Not because I was unsure of the answer, because I wanted to be sure I was doing this for the right reason. Not spite. Spite was loud, and spite always cost you more than it collected. This was something else. Simply refusing to keep funding a stage I'd been told, plainly, I wasn't welcome to stand on. Not yet, I said finally. Let's give it a few days. I'd rather this resolve on its own if it's going to. But I want everything documented starting today. Every call, every date, every conversation. Understood, Yolanda said. I'll flag the account. Nothing releases without your explicit sign-off. Effective this morning. I thanked her and gathered the folder. I drove toward Wednesday choir rehearsal a day early in my head, though it wasn't Wednesday. I caught my mistake in the parking lot and laughed at myself. Quiet, alone in the car. The first thing that had felt like laughter in 2 days. I saw Reverend Saul Whitaker on Sunday. Same as always. He stood at the sanctuary door shaking hands as the congregation filed out into the June heat. He held my hand a beat longer than the others. You look like a woman carrying something, he said. I'm always carrying something, Reverend. Comes with the job. Which job? The choir or the mothering? I almost smiled. Both, lately. He walked with me to my car instead of turning back to the next family in line. Saul Whitaker didn't do that for just anybody. You remember that conversation we had back in the fall about Delia Foster's daughter? I remember. Delia paid for that whole wedding. Every flower, every plate, every band. Uninvited from her own son's reception 3 weeks before the day. Replaced at the head table by his fiancé's mother, a woman Delia had met exactly twice. You told me that couldn't happen to you, because you'd already fixed it. I had fixed it, I said. The fixing isn't the hard part, Reverend. The hard part is using it. Are you using it? I'm thinking about it. He nodded slowly, the way he nodded at the pulpit when a hard truth needed room to land. Renata, I've watched you hold that choir together 19 years, never once needing to shout at a teenager who couldn't carry a tune. I've watched you bury a husband and raise a daughter, never asking this congregation for a thing in return. If there's a woman in Winston-Salem who's earned the right to protect her own dignity without apologizing for it, it's you. Thank you, Reverend. Don't thank me. Just don't talk yourself out of what you already built. I drove home with that sitting in my chest the rest of the day. I busied myself with small things, dusting the mantel where Walter's photo sat next to a ceramic dove Camille made in 3rd grade, refolding choir robes I'd already folded that morning. I was still folding robes, if I was honest, so I wouldn't have to sit still with the size of what my daughter had done. Camille called that evening. I almost let it go to voicemail, then didn't. Hey, Mom? Camille's voice had the too bright pitch she used when she wanted something smoothed over quick. Just checking in. You're not mad about the other day, right? I just want everything to be easy for everyone. Easy for everyone, I repeated. You know what I mean. I know exactly what you mean, baby. There was a pause on the line, the kind where a person half hopes the silence means forgiveness, and half fears it means something worse. Camille filled it the way she always filled uncomfortable silences, with information nobody had asked for. Deborah's been amazing, honestly. She's handling the final walkthrough with the venue coordinator, so I don't have to stress about the money side. You really don't need to worry about the balance schedule. Preston's family has it handled. I sat very still in my kitchen chair. Does she? Yeah, it's just easier this way. Fewer moving parts. Well, I said, I do like fewer moving parts. I got off the phone a few minutes later, said the things a mother says. Love you. Get some rest. Set my phone face down on the counter. Preston's family has it handled. I knew exactly how much money Preston's family had put toward that wedding. I'd watched every invoice pass through my own account for 8 months. It was not nothing, but it was a fraction. And Camille, apparently, had already begun rewriting the story in her own head, one where the Whitfields were quietly saving the day. And my side, the loud, embarrassing side, could simply be thanked and forgotten. I went out to the garage that night. I flipped on the single bare bulb over Walter's old workbench. I opened the toolbox he'd left behind 17 years ago. I wasn't looking for anything specific. I just wanted to be near something of his hands. In the bottom drawer, under a coil of old electrical wire, I found his union pin, the little enamel emblem from the furniture workers local. He'd carried it in his coat pocket for as long as I'd known him. Tucked beside it, folded small, a scrap of notebook paper in his handwriting. I didn't remember ever seeing it before. Keep your name on things, it read. Not because you don't trust people, because you love them enough to protect them from what they might become when money's involved. I sat on the garage's concrete floor a long while, pin in one hand, note in the other, the bare bulb buzzing overhead. 17 years, and Walter was still teaching me something new about the exact shape of love. I put both back in the drawer, closed the toolbox, turned off the light. Whatever came next, I decided I would not be the one who forgot my own name. My old friend Beatrice Coles called the next morning, the way she called most mornings. The two of us had worked adjoining stations on the pediatric floor for over 2 decades before she retired a year ahead of me. Beatrice had a gift for asking one direct question and then simply waiting, patient as still water, until the real answer surfaced underneath whatever polite version came out first. You sound different, Beatrice said, 20 seconds into a conversation that had started out about nothing. What happened? I told her. Beatrice listened the way she'd always listened at that nurse's station. Quiet, attentive, saving her reaction until she had the whole picture. Camille said that, Beatrice repeated, once I finished. To you, after everything you've done for that girl. She did. Renata Ashby, I have known you 30 years. I watched you work 3 doubles in 1 week the month Walter died. Never once complained to a soul on that floor. If anybody on God's earth has earned an unconditional seat at a family table, it's you. Beatrice paused. What are you going to do? I already know what I'm going to do, I said. I just needed to say it out loud to somebody who'd tell me the truth back. Then say it. I'm going to let the paperwork speak for me. Calm, documented. No shouting. That's my girl, Beatrice said. I could hear the smile in it. You call me the second it's done. I want to hear every word. I hung up and sat with my coffee a moment longer than usual. Beatrice had a way of saying things plainly that always made me feel, briefly, 30 years younger, back on that pediatric floor, 2 women in matching scrubs figuring out how to survive a shift together, one small kindness at a time. I thought about how many women like Beatrice had quietly held me up over the years, without ever once asking for recognition. Miss Odessa, Reverend Whitaker, Yolanda, in her own professional way. Simone, most of all. It occurred to me, sitting there, that I had built more of a support system than I usually gave myself credit for. Maybe that was its own kind of protection, every bit as sturdy as a signed document in a manila folder. The Curl Bar sat on Peters Creek Parkway, 2 doors down from a barbecue joint older than the shopping center around it. I had gotten my locks retwisted there every 6 weeks for going on a decade. I knew the owner, Patrice, well enough to ask about her grandkids. I knew the chairs, the smell of the products, the particular hum of 3 conversations happening at once under 3 different dryers. I almost didn't hear it at first. Deborah Whitfield's voice carried a certain register, pitched for a room to overhear, without technically being caught eavesdropping on. I had learned over 54 years to recognize that register the moment it started. Honestly, the Ashby-Sides money worked out just fine, Deborah was saying to a friend 2 chairs down. Someone I didn't recognize. Both getting blowouts before some luncheon I hadn't been invited to and wouldn't have wanted to attend. Better without the extra drama, if I'm being completely honest. Camille agrees. We just needed things to look a certain way. And now they will. The friend laughed, light and careless. Mothers can be so much, can't they? You have no idea, Deborah said. I told the coordinator myself. Keep it elegant. Keep it simple. No surprises. Camille's mother means well, I'm sure. But there's a way things are done in Preston's family. We needed to protect that. I sat under my own dryer, hood down, a magazine open on my lap I wasn't reading. I let every word land. Not one muscle in my face moved. Patrice, working the chair beside me, caught my eye in the mirror for half a second, then very deliberately did not look again. The kind of discretion you only earn after 10 years of doing someone's hair and reading someone's face in the same mirror. We just needed things to look a certain way. I turned that phrase over the whole ride home, past the barbecue joint, past the shopping center, past the church where I'd directed the youth choir for 19 years. It wasn't the first time I'd heard some version of that sentence. It had a shape to it, the kind you recognize from just the first 2 notes, even decades later, even dressed up in nicer language than the version I'd grown up hearing. I didn't say anything to Camille that week, not yet. I wanted to see how far this had already gone. There was exactly one way to find that out without tipping my hand. I called Marcus Odom Thursday evening. Marcus, I need you to look at something for me. Anything, Renata. What is it? The wedding fund agreement. Clause 3. I want to make sure it says exactly what I think it says. And I want to know how fast it takes effect, if I need it to. There was a pause on the line, the kind a lawyer takes before choosing his next question carefully. Has something happened? I told him. All of it, in order, the same way I'd told Yolanda. Facts stacked plain, no embellishment. The kitchen table. You get loud. Preston's family has it handled. The salon. Deborah's voice, pitched for the room. We just needed things to look a certain way. Marcus was quiet a long moment when I finished. Renata, I drafted that document to protect you from exactly this. I didn't think we'd need it inside of a year. Neither did I. You know that clause is airtight. The moment your name isn't on that guest list, in writing, you have full authority to cancel the balance. No court in this state calls that anything but what it is. A conditional gift you're entitled to withdraw. I know, I said. I drafted it to be airtight. I want it read out loud, though, not just enforced quietly. I want the people in that room to hear, in plain English, exactly what they signed. Then we do it in a room with witnesses, Marcus said. Tell me when. I thought about the venue walkthrough that Saturday, 3 days before the wedding. The one where Camille had mentioned, almost in passing, that Deborah would be handling things with the coordinator. I hadn't been invited to that walkthrough either. I hadn't asked to be. Saturday, I said. The final walkthrough. I'll be there. You're not currently on the guest list for the walkthrough. No, I said, but I'm the person whose signature is required to release $38,000 for it to happen at all. I imagine that gets me through the door. Marcus laughed, short and surprised, a sound I didn't often get out of him. I'll be there at 9 sharp. I hung up. I sat at my kitchen table a long while, the same table where Camille had told me to stay home 4 days earlier. I let myself feel, finally, the full size of what had been done to me. Not the wedding invitation itself. I could have absorbed being left off a guest list, some other version of my life, where my daughter had been cruel out of stress and would come around eventually. This was different. This was two women, mother and future mother-in-law, sitting in a hair salon, congratulating themselves on managing me out of the picture like a scheduling problem. We just needed things to look a certain way. I had spent my whole nursing career making sure no child ever felt like a problem to be managed rather than a person to be tended. I'd spent 28 years teaching a choir full of teenagers that their voices mattered, even when they cracked, even when they rushed the bridge, even when the world outside that fellowship hall told them different. I was not going to spend this chapter of raising my own daughter a different way, not accepting that my presence in a family photo was something to be optics managed. Not by a woman I'd met exactly 4 times. Camille called Friday night. This time her voice had lost its too bright pitch entirely. Mom, the venue called Preston. They're saying there's a problem with the final payment schedule. Something about a hold on the account. Is that so? I said. Mom, what did you do? I haven't done anything yet, baby. I asked my bank to make sure nothing releases without my say-so. That's always been my right. It's been in the agreement since March. What agreement? I closed my eyes a moment, standing in my kitchen. Same window, same mockingbird outside doing its evening rounds. The one you signed, Camille, 8 months ago. I imagine you should go find it and read all of it this time. The line went quiet except for Camille's breathing, quick, shallow, the sound of someone doing frantic math in her head and not liking any of the answers. I'll see you Saturday morning, I said, gently. Because even now, even furious in a way I hadn't let myself feel out loud yet, I was still, underneath everything, a mother speaking to her child. At the walkthrough. I didn't invite you to the walkthrough. No, I said, but I believe I'm required. I hung up first, which I almost never did. I stood in my kitchen a long moment, listening to the quiet after. Tomorrow was Saturday. Whatever this had become, it would not stay a private thing between mother and daughter much longer. It would happen out loud, in a room full of people, the way the wound had started. And I found to my own quiet surprise that I was not afraid of that at all. My niece, Simone, was the one who noticed first that something had shifted. Simone was 22, my late brother's daughter. She'd practically grown up on the guest bed in my spare room. Summers on Sunset Drive, while her own mother worked 2 jobs across town. She was studying nursing at Winston-Salem State now, following a path I'd cleared for her without ever saying so directly. She still came by Sunday afternoons for dinner, more often than not. You've been folding that same robe for 10 minutes, Auntie, Simone said. She leaned in the doorway of the spare room that Sunday, watching me smooth the choir robe over and over like it had personally wronged me. What's going on? I set the iron down. I hadn't planned to tell Simone anything. But Simone had her father's eyes, warm and direct. It was hard to lie to a face that reminded me so much of my own brother. Camille told me not to come to her wedding. Simone's mouth fell open. She what? Said I'd embarrass her. In front of Preston's family. Auntie. Simone crossed the room and sat down hard on the edge of the guest bed. That's not okay. That's not even close to okay. No, I agreed. It isn't. What are you going to do? I told her plainly. The way I'd told Yolanda. The way I'd told Marcus. The conditional gift. The clause. The walkthrough scheduled for Saturday. Simone listened with her whole body leaned forward. The way she used to listen to bedtime stories as a little girl. Except now the story was real, and the stakes belonged to someone she loved. Good, Simone said when I finished. Good, Auntie. I'm sorry, but good. You've spent my whole life giving that girl everything, never once asking for anything back. If she can't give you a seat at her own wedding, she doesn't deserve the $38,000, let alone the 28 years before it. She's still my daughter, Simone. I know. I love her too. But loving somebody doesn't mean letting them erase you to make somebody else comfortable. Simone reached over and squeezed my hand. You want me to come Saturday? To the walkthrough? I considered it. Part of me wanted the company. A larger part of me knew this needed to happen exactly the way I'd planned. Calm, documented, without an audience that might read as reinforcements rather than simple fact. No, baby. But thank you for offering. This one I need to do myself. Then I'll be praying it goes exactly the way it should. That week passed slower than any week I could remember since the month after Walter died. I went to my volunteer post at the free clinic on Tuesday, same as always. The one thing I'd taken up in retirement to keep my hands useful and my mind busy. I directed choir practice Wednesday evening, same hymn, same sopranos rushing the bridge. But this time, when I corrected them, my own voice carried a little further than usual, a little steadier, like something in me had quietly recalibrated. Camille texted twice that week, short, careful messages, the kind that read like a woman testing whether a door was still cracked open. Mom, can we talk? And later, I've been thinking about what you said. I answered both with warmth, no coldness, no punishment in my tone, because punishment was never what this was about. I love you, I wrote back each time. We'll talk soon. I did not, however, remove the hold on the account. Not yet. Whatever softening was happening in Camille's texts, I had learned enough in 54 years to know something simple. Soft words sent late at night rarely survive contact with daylight and other people's opinions, especially a future mother-in-law's opinions, especially one as invested in a certain image as Deborah Whitfield clearly was. On Thursday, I got a call from Preston himself. It surprised me enough that I almost let it go to voicemail out of sheer disbelief. Miss Ashby, it's Preston. I hope it's all right that I'm calling. Of course, Preston, I wanted to say. He started, then stopped, then started again. The particular stammer of a young man who's clearly rehearsed something and is losing his nerve halfway through. I didn't know. About you being told to stay home. Camille told me after the fact. I want you to know I would never have agreed to that. Never. My mother can be, she has strong opinions about how things should look. And sometimes Camille gets caught up trying to please her. But that's not an excuse. It's not right, what happened. And I'm sorry. I was quiet a moment, genuinely moved despite myself. Thank you for saying that, Preston. I want you at the wedding, Ms. Ashby. At the front, honestly, wherever you're comfortable sitting. You're the reason Camille turned out to be the person I fell in love with. Anybody who can't see that isn't somebody whose opinion should matter on the guest list. I appreciate you telling me that. Is there anything I can do to fix this before Saturday? I thought about that question a long moment, turning it over slowly, the way I turned over every hard question, without rushing toward the easy answer. You can be in that room Saturday, Preston, and you can say to your mother's face exactly what you just said to me, not because I need you to defend me, because your future wife needs to see clearly which side of you she's marrying." There was a long pause on the line. "I'll be there," he said finally. "I'll say it." I thanked him and hung up. I sat with my tea going cold on the counter, thinking about how strange it was. The kindest voice I'd heard all week belonged to the one person in this whole mess who had the least obligation to offer me any kindness at all. Friday brought the venue's first call to Preston about the payment hold. That sent Camille into the tailspin that ended with her calling me that evening, voice thin, asking, "What did you do?" I had answered that call already knowing, with total clarity, exactly how Saturday would go, and exactly what I would and would not let myself feel standing in that barn. I was done being managed. I was done being someone else's optics problem. And I intended, for the first time in 28 years of quietly holding this family up, to let everyone in that room see exactly how much weight I'd been carrying, and exactly what happened when I finally set even one small piece of it down. Camille's college roommate, Danielle, called her Friday night too, though I didn't learn about that call until much later. Danielle had heard the whole story secondhand through a mutual friend. She spent 20 minutes on the phone telling Camille, in no uncertain terms, that she was about to lose the one relationship in her life that had never once asked her to shrink herself. Camille didn't repeat much of that conversation to me afterward. She didn't need to. I could see its aftermath plainly enough in the shorter, gentler texts that arrived over the following days, and in the particular quiet that had crept into my daughter's voice by Friday evening, the sound of someone finally listening to more than one voice in the room. There was a second thing in the manila folder. I hadn't mentioned it to anyone yet. Not Yolanda, not Marcus, not even Reverend Whitaker in the church parking lot. I'd almost forgotten it myself until Wednesday night, sitting at my kitchen table rereading the whole agreement start to finish, making certain I hadn't missed anything before Saturday. Clause 5. I'd asked Marcus 8 months ago to add one more provision, almost as an afterthought at the time. The kind of thing you add because a lawyer tells you it's prudent, and you don't expect it will ever matter. Clause 5 said this: if the final installment got canceled under Clause 3, the entire gift, all $38,000, including the 2 installments already released and spent, would revert to a joint accounting review. I would retain the right to request documentation on how the earlier funds had been used. I hadn't thought much about that clause when I signed off on it. I thought about it a great deal now, because the March and May installments, $61,000 combined, had gone toward vendor deposits, and I had quietly noticed, reviewing the account with Yolanda that first Tuesday morning, that the invoices didn't fully add up. 61,000 released, roughly 44,000 actually paid to vendors, according to the receipts Camille had forwarded over the months, a gap of $17,000. Back in April, I had assumed it was simply Camille keeping a buffer for incidentals, the way any bride might. I called Yolanda first thing Thursday morning. "I need you to pull something for me," I said. "The wedding fund disbursements from March and May. I want to see exactly where every dollar went, if you can trace it." It took Yolanda most of the day. She called back at 4:15, her voice careful, in the particular way bank employees get careful right before telling a client something that isn't good news. "Ms. Ashby, I traced it as far as I'm able from our end. About 17,000 of the released funds went to a joint account you're not a signatory on, one your daughter opened with Preston back in February. From there, I can't see where it went. That's outside what Truist can track for you. But the transfer pattern itself is clear as day." I sat with that a long moment. $17,000, meant for a caterer or a florist or a string quartet, quietly redirected into an account I'd never known existed. I thought about calling Camille immediately. I decided against it. Not yet. I wanted the full picture before Saturday. Not a half-formed accusation Camille could talk her way around with tears and a story about incidentals. I called Preston instead, the same evening he'd called me, hoping he might know something Camille hadn't told me. Preston, I have an odd question, and I want you to answer it honestly, whatever the answer is. Of course, Ms. Ashby. Do you and Camille have a joint account? One you opened back in February? The pause on the line told me most of what I needed to know before he even spoke. We do, he said slowly. For wedding expenses mostly. Why? Do you know where $17,000 of my wedding gift ended up going through that account? Another pause, longer this time. When Preston spoke again, his voice had lost the easy confidence from our earlier call. Ms. Ashby, I think you need to ask Camille that directly. I don't think it's my place to say. Preston. He exhaled slowly. There was a car. My old truck died in February, right before we got engaged. Camille didn't want to ask you for more money on top of the wedding, so she said she'd handle it out of what you'd already given her. I didn't think much of it at the time. I should have. I closed my eyes. A car. My daughter had quietly diverted a chunk of her wedding gift to buy her fiancé a car, rather than admit to me that money was tight, rather than simply ask. The one thing I had always told her she was allowed to do. It wasn't theft, not really. It was still, technically, Camille's gift to spend as she saw fit, at least until Clause 3 triggered and Clause 5 came into play behind it. But it told me something important about the shape of my daughter's fear. Camille wasn't just embarrassed by me in front of the Whitfields. Camille was embarrassed, period, about needing help at all, about not being able to fully fund the image of a family with everything handled, no help needed, and rather than be honest about that fear, she'd quietly solved it with money that wasn't fully hers to redirect, then doubled down by trying to erase the person who'd given it to her in the first place. I understood, sitting alone at my kitchen table that Thursday night, that Saturday was no longer only about a guest list. It was about a pattern, one my daughter had built, brick by brick, solving discomfort by making her mother smaller, quieter, more absent. Rather than simply telling the truth and asking for grace, I decided finally exactly what I'd say when the moment came. Not to punish Camille, to make sure Camille heard it once, in a room full of witnesses. Precisely what had been happening. So whatever marriage began that weekend began with at least one lesson fully learned, rather than quietly buried under string lights and rented chairs. I called Marcus one more time that night. One more thing for Saturday, I said. I want to bring up Clause 5 as well. Not to punish anyone over the car, but I want it on the record, documented, that I know. Understood, Marcus said. Renata, for what it's worth, I've handled a great deal of family paperwork over the years. I've rarely seen anyone hold this much composure through this much provocation. It isn't composure, Marcus, it's practice. I've had 28 years of practice. I hung up. I sat a long while at my kitchen table. Table, same window. The mockingbird long gone quiet for the night. Tomorrow was Friday. Saturday came after that. I thought about Walter's note in the garage toolbox. Keep your name on things. I understood now, more fully than I had all week, what it had really meant. It had never only meant a bank account. It had meant my whole self, my voice, my seat at the table, my right not to be erased for someone else's comfort, even my own child's, even a family I loved as much as I'd ever loved anything in this world. I thought, too, about the $17,000 itself and what it would have meant to a younger version of myself. A whole year of night shift overtime, back when Camille was small. A number that could have paid off the mortgage 2 years early, or covered every unexpected furnace repair on Sunset Drive for a decade. I wasn't angry about the amount. I had never once in 54 years been a woman who measured love in dollars. But I understood, sitting with that number now, exactly why it mattered that Camille had hidden it rather than asked. A hidden $17,000 was a small thing, a pattern of hiding passed down to whatever children Camille eventually raised of her own was not a small thing at all. I had not always been the kind of woman who kept her own name on things. That habit, like most of the useful ones I carried, had been built slowly, out of necessity. In the years right after Walter died, I thought about that a great deal in the days leading up to Saturday, lying awake some nights, the ceiling fan turning slow overhead, the house around me quiet, the way a house gets quiet once a child has grown and moved out. The only sounds left are the ones the building makes settling into the night. The first year after Walter's death had nearly broken me. Not the grief, though the grief was real, heavy. It still came in waves 17 years later without warning. It was the practical avalanche underneath the grief. The furniture plant's pension had been smaller than either of us expected. Tied up for months in paperwork, I had to learn to navigate alone, at night, after 12-hour shifts, with an 11-year-old asleep down the hall who needed me to seem steady, even when I wasn't. I remembered a man from Walter's Union local, a kind man named Gerald Simpkins. He showed up on my porch one evening with a casserole dish and a piece of advice I never forgot. "Renata," he'd said, standing on my steps in his work boots. "A lot of good men and women in this town have worked their whole lives and ended up with nothing to show for it in their own name, because they let it sit in accounts and deeds that belonged to somebody else. A husband, a company, a family member who meant well until they didn't. Walter loved you. But love isn't paperwork. Get your name on things, Renata. Every single thing you can." I'd taken that advice seriously for 17 years. Every account I opened after that had my name on it. Only my name, or my name first with any joint holder listed clearly beneath it. I refinanced the Sunset Drive mortgage in my own name alone, within 2 years of Walter's death, once the estate settled, rather than let it sit in some ambiguous joint status anyone could contest. I had built, without ever fully saying it to myself, a whole architecture of self-protection, out of one piece of porch step advice, from a man who'd buried too many friends who learned the lesson too late. Gerald himself had died 6 years back. Cancer, quiet and quick at the end. I sang at his funeral, the same alto part I'd sung at Walter's. That was simply what you did in Ardmore when someone who'd shown up decent for you finally needed you to show up for them. I stood at his graveside afterward, talking with his widow, Marjorie. Marjorie told me, almost as an aside, that Gerald had given that exact same porch step speech to a dozen other widows over the years. Always the same words. Get your name on things. Every time somebody buried a husband too young. I had carried that image with me ever since. An ordinary man in work boots making his quiet rounds through a grieving neighborhood, handing out the one piece of protection he had to offer, over and over, expecting nothing back for it. It had never once occurred to me in all those years that I might one day need to use that same protection against my own daughter. I'd built it as a shield against the outside world, against creditors, hospitals, a system with a long, well-documented habit of failing to protect Black women, widows especially ones without a lawyer in the family or money set aside for one. I'd never imagined the threat might come from inside my own kitchen, at my own table, from the child I'd raised with every ounce of that same protective instinct. I thought about calling Camille that Friday night, one more time before Saturday, to try once more to reach whatever part of my daughter had written those careful late-night texts earlier in the week. I picked up my phone twice, set it back down twice. I had already said what needed saying. Anything more tonight would only be me trying to spare myself the discomfort of walking into that barn tomorrow with things still unresolved. That discomfort, I decided, was mine to carry, not something to outsource with a rushed apology neither of us was ready to give or receive yet. I thought, briefly, about calling Beatrice instead, just to hear a steady voice before bed. I decided against that too. Some nights called for company. This one, I understood, called for quiet, for sitting with a hard thing long enough to know exactly what shape it was before carrying it into a room full of other people the next morning. I spent Friday evening instead doing something I hadn't done in months. I pulled the photo albums from the hall closet, the physical ones, printed pictures from before everyone's whole life lived on a phone. I sat at my kitchen table, turning pages slowly. Camille at 6, gap-toothed, holding her father's hand at the state fair. Camille at 11, in the black dress 2 sizes too big, gripping my fingers at the graveside. Camille at 18, in her graduation gown, grinning so wide it looked like it might hurt. Me standing beside her in a dress I'd bought secondhand and altered myself. Because the wedding fund, even then, years before there was a wedding, had already begun quietly accumulating in the back of my mind. A promise I intended to keep. I had loved this girl with everything I had. I still did. That was, I understood now, precisely why this hurt as much as it did. If Camille had been a stranger, an acquaintance's daughter, being asked to stay home would have stung and faded within a week. But Camille was the entire reason I had built the life I'd built. The reason I'd worked every double shift, refinanced every account, kept my own name on every deed. Being told by that same girl that my presence was a liability to be optics managed cut all the way down to the foundation. I closed the photo album around 10 o'clock. I sat with my tea going cold, same as it had most nights that week. I let myself cry for the first time since Monday. Not loudly, not for long. Just a few minutes of quiet release at my own kitchen table, alone. The way I'd cried after Walter's funeral, once the last casserole dish had been washed and returned, and the house had finally gone still. Then I washed my face, put the albums away, laid out my clothes for Saturday morning. A simple navy blazer. Low, sensible shoes I could stand in comfortably, however long the walk-through took. I did not dress to impress anyone in that barn. I dressed the way I'd dress for a hospital board meeting. Professional, composed, unmistakably a woman who belonged in whatever room she chose to walk into. Saturday arrived gray and humid, the kind of North Carolina June morning that promises rain by afternoon, even though the sky hasn't committed to it yet. I woke before my alarm, made coffee, sat on my back porch 20 minutes, watching the light come up over my small garden. The tomatoes Walter had staked along the back fence 17 years back still bore fruit every summer. The vines had reseeded themselves so many times, they no longer resembled anything he'd planted. And yet they were still, in some essential way, his. I thought about the mantra I'd repeated all week, the one I'd first said out loud to Simone months ago, during a different family disagreement entirely. I don't raise my voice. I raise the standard. I said it once more, quietly, to the empty porch. Then I went inside, gathered my folder, drove to meet Marcus Odom at 9 sharp, 20 minutes outside Greensboro, at a vineyard barn dressed in white tents for a wedding that, as of that morning, still didn't officially know whether it would happen. There was a version of that Thursday morning where I could have chosen differently. Back when I first sat across from Yolanda, in the little room with the lighthouse print, I turned that thought over more than once that week. Not because I doubted my decision, because I believed, as a matter of discipline, in examining a hard choice from every angle first. I could have called Camille that very first evening, calm, measured, simply said, "I heard what you said, and I need you to take it back before this goes any further." Some younger version of me might have done exactly that, might have tried to talk my daughter out of the cruelty before it hardened into something acted upon rather than merely spoken. I'd decided against it for a reason I needed a full day to name, even to myself. Talking Camille out of a feeling in the heat of the moment would only teach my daughter one thing: that consequences were negotiable if you caught your mother early enough, before she'd had time to think it through. I wanted Camille to sit with the full weight of what she'd said, uninterrupted, the way I myself once had to sit with the full weight of losing Walter, without anyone rushing in to soften it before I'd finished feeling it. There was also the matter of Deborah, the pattern I had begun to recognize the more I thought about it. A single confrontation at the kitchen table would have addressed Camille's cruelty, but it would have left Deborah's fingerprints on the whole affair untouched, unnamed, free to keep operating the same way in every family gathering for the next 30 years. I had watched over 5 decades plenty of families quietly absorb one relative's controlling influence, generation after generation, because nobody was willing to name it plainly, in a room, with witnesses, in language specific enough it couldn't be reframed later as an overreaction. I thought about my own mother, briefly, that week. My mother worked as a domestic, 3 Winston-Salem households across 4 decades, raising 5 children on wages that would embarrass anyone who did the arithmetic today. She'd told me once, near the end of her life, about a particular employer, a woman who praised her cooking, then made her use the back door. Every morning, no exceptions. "I let it go for 30 years, baby," my mother said, sitting in a hospital bed the week before she passed. I held her hand, the way I'd once held Camille's at Walter's graveside, because letting it go felt like the only dignity I had. "I want better for you. Whatever room they put you in, you decide the terms of walking back out." I had carried that instruction for over 20 years, without ever quite finding the moment it was fully meant for. I understood now, walking into that Saturday morning walkthrough, that this was precisely the moment my mother had been preparing me for, all along, decades before Camille was even born, decades before Deborah Whitfield ever set foot in a room with either of us. I thought, too, about the particular cruelty of it, being told you might embarrass your own family simply by attending an event you'd personally financed. There was an old, tired shape to that insult, one I recognized instantly, even dressed up in new language. The shape of being told your presence, your voice, your very face carried a cost that your money somehow did not. The logic that lets people cash a check gladly while flinching at the hand that wrote it. I'd watched that same logic play out, in smaller and larger ways, my whole working life. Hospital hallways where my competence got praised in the same breath my presence got quietly managed. Community meetings where my volunteer hours got celebrated while my opinions on policy got politely set aside. I was not going to let that logic take root in my own family. Not after everything I'd built specifically to prevent it. I understood, sitting with all of this before the walkthrough, that Saturday's stakes went well beyond $38,000 and one wedding day. They reached into what Camille would eventually teach her own children, about which family members deserved unconditional welcome, and which deserved only a seat contingent on good behavior. They reached into whether Deborah Whitfield's particular brand of soft-spoken exclusion would keep operating unchecked, every family gathering for 30 more years, or whether someone, finally, calmly, with documentation in hand, would name it plainly enough that it couldn't survive daylight. I had spent my whole life being the person who stayed calm so everyone else could fall apart safely around her. The nurse, steadying a terrified parent. The choir director holding the note so a frightened teenager could find her own voice underneath hers. The widow who kept the mortgage paid so her grieving daughter never felt the ground shift beneath her. I had rarely, in 54 years, let myself be the one whose feelings required the room's full attention. Saturday, I decided, would be different. Not because I intended to fall apart in front of anyone, because I intended, for the first time in longer than I could remember, to let my own dignity be the thing the room organized itself around, rather than the thing quietly managed to keep everyone else comfortable. Camille had not always been the kind of daughter who reached first for the easy story over the true one. I thought about that often, that week, trying to locate the exact point where my daughter started choosing comfort over honesty. I kept arriving at the same uncomfortable answer. It started slowly, gradually, somewhere in the years after Camille left for college. And I hadn't noticed it happening in time to correct course. I remembered Camille at 8 years old, marching into the kitchen after a classmate made fun of her for bringing sweet potato pie instead of store-bought cupcakes, announcing with total 8-year-old conviction that she'd told the girl exactly where to put her opinion about pie. I laughed so hard that evening I had to sit down, proud in a way I hadn't bothered to hide. At 8 years old, Camille hadn't yet learned that some rooms punished you for defending yourself plainly. I remembered Camille at 15, coming home furious after a teacher suggested, gently but unmistakably, that a school Camille hoped to attend might be a stretch for a student from her background. I sat with her at this same kitchen table for 2 hours, helping her draft a rebuttal letter to the guidance counselor's office. Not because Camille needed permission to be angry, because I wanted her to learn early that anger, aimed correctly and backed with facts, could move institutions. Somewhere between that furious, clear-eyed 15-year-old and the 27-year-old telling her mother to stay home, something had shifted. I suspected, though I never said this to Camille, that the shift had less to do with her character, more to do with the pressure of moving through rooms, professionally and socially, that never fully welcomed her. Rooms where the path of least resistance seemed to run straight through minimizing anything uncomfortable, eventually, including her own mother. I thought about the marketing firm Camille worked for, the handful of times my daughter had mentioned, almost in passing, being the only Black woman in a client meeting, being asked by well-meaning colleagues if she could bring some of that energy to a pitch. A request that always carried an unspoken assumption about what kind of energy she was expected to represent. I understood, better than most, the exhaustion of navigating those rooms daily, softening yourself just enough to be palatable, without disappearing entirely. I suspected Camille had, without fully realizing it, begun applying that same softening instinct to her own family, treating my presence as one more variable to manage for a room that was never going to fully welcome either of us, no matter how much softening occurred. That understanding did not excuse what Camille had done. I was careful, in those days before the walkthrough, not to let empathy slide into excuse-making, a habit I'd watched too many mothers fall into, on behalf of grown children who needed, more than sympathy, a clear accounting of the cost of their choices. But it did help me understand the shape of the wound, and it helped me decide, with more clarity than I might otherwise have found, exactly how to address it. Not as a betrayal requiring punishment, as a pattern requiring interruption. before it calcified into the only way Camille knew how to survive in rooms that made her feel, even now, even successful, even loved, like a guest in her own life, rather than its center. I thought about calling my daughter's therapist. Camille had mentioned seeing one, occasionally, over the past year, just to understand better. I decided against it almost immediately. This was not my story to manage on Camille's behalf. It was Camille's to sit with, to name eventually, in whatever room, to whatever person she trusted enough to say it plainly. My job, I reminded myself, was simply to make the facts undeniable. Undeniable enough that Camille couldn't quietly rewrite them into something smaller and easier to live with. I thought too about my own late mother's warning. Decide the terms of walking back out of the room. It applied here as much as it had ever applied to anything. Camille had walked into a room built by Deborah Whitfield's careful, decades-long idea of how a certain family was supposed to look. She'd let herself be shaped by its terms, rather than setting her own. My task now was not to drag my daughter out of that room by force. It was to make the terms of staying in my own room unconditionally, honestly, so plainly attractive that Camille would choose to walk back out of Deborah's version and into mine, on her own power, the same way I had once chosen, decades earlier, to put my own name on every account I touched, rather than wait for someone else to hand me the protection I deserved. By Friday night, laying out my navy blazer, I had made peace with what I intended to do. I was not walking into that barn to win an argument. I was walking in to hold up a mirror, steady enough that everyone standing in front of it, my daughter included, would have no choice but to see clearly, for once, exactly what they'd been building, and exactly what it had nearly cost. I spent Friday afternoon, the day before the walkthrough, at the free clinic. I'd volunteered there every Tuesday for 4 years, though it wasn't my scheduled day. I hadn't planned to go in. I found myself driving there anyway, restless in the house, needing my hands busy with something other than folding the same choir robe over and over. The clinic served the uninsured and underinsured across 3 counties, mostly working families, caught in the gap between qualifying for assistance and affording private coverage. I had spent enough Tuesdays there to know most of the regular staff by name. I found the clinic director, a soft-spoken physician named Dr. Naomi Falk, restocking a supply closet. I offered to help without being asked, the way I offered most things. "You seem like a woman thinking hard about something," Dr. Falk said, handing me a box of gauze to shelve. "Family matter," I said. "Nothing the clinic can fix. Sometimes talking it through helps anyway." "I've got 20 minutes before my next patient." I found myself unexpectedly laying the whole thing out, for a woman I barely knew outside these walls, in a supply closet that smelled of antiseptic and cardboard. The kitchen table, the claws, the salon, the $17,000. Dr. Falk listened without interrupting. The same unhurried attention she gave every patient who walked through the clinic's doors, regardless of what they could pay. "You know," Dr. Falk said when I finished, "I see a version of this more often than you'd think, just from the other side of the exam table. Families who've quietly agreed that one person's dignity is negotiable when it's inconvenient. Usually the person who's given the most is the one asked to give the most flexibility too, as though love and sacrifice earn you less standing to object, not more." "That's precisely it," I said. "I gave everything, and somehow that made my presence the thing up for negotiation. What are you going to do?" "Exactly what I'd tell any patient's family to do," I said. "If I saw this playing out in a hospital hallway, get it in writing. Say it plainly. Don't let anyone tell you calm means agreement." Dr. Falk smiled, a small, knowing thing. You've been giving people that advice your whole career, haven't you? Just never applied it to yourself until now. I considered that on the drive home. The truth of it settling in slowly, the way most hard truths did. I'd spent 30 years advocating fiercely for frightened parents in triage, coaching them through exactly how to insist on being heard by doctors who sometimes moved too fast to listen. I had never once in all those years turned that same fierce advocacy on my own family. Family, I'd always assumed, ran on a different set of rules. Rules built on trust rather than documentation, love rather than leverage. I understood now, driving past the shopping center, the barbecue joint, the church where I'd directed the choir for 19 years. Trust and documentation were not actually opposites. The healthiest families, I suspected, the ones that survived money and grief and decades of ordinary friction without quietly erasing anyone, were the ones honest enough to write their love down, in terms specific enough to survive a bad week, a controlling in-law, a moment of panic or shame or pride. Walter had understood that, decades ago, sitting at our kitchen table with unpaid bills between us, telling me to keep my name on things, not because he doubted my family's love, because he understood, with a clarity I was only now fully catching up to, that love without structure eventually asks somebody to disappear quietly for everyone else's comfort. I was done disappearing quietly. I'd been done with it, I realized, for longer than I'd let myself admit. Saturday was simply the day the rest of the world was going to find that out too. Deborah Whitfield had grown up in Greensboro, a house with a circular driveway, a name on the mailbox that had opened doors in that town for 3 generations. Her husband's landscaping supply business, started by his father, now run day-to-day by Preston's older brother, supplied half the golf courses and country clubs in the Triad. Deborah had spent 30 years cultivating a certain kind of social polish, the kind that comes from never once having to worry where the next payment was coming from. She had met me exactly 4 times before the walkthrough. Once at an engagement dinner, brief and cordial, both of us on best behavior. Once at a cake tasting, where Deborah spent most of the appointment on her phone. Once at a bridal shower I hosted myself, in my own backyard, with my own hands. Homemade sweet potato pie from my grandmother's recipe out of Rocky Mount. Deborah complimented the pie twice, then later told a mutual acquaintance it was surprisingly good for what it was. A phrase I heard secondhand and chose at the time to let go. And once, 3 weeks before the walkthrough, at a small family dinner meant to finalize seating arrangements, Deborah first floated, gently, almost kindly, the suggestion that eventually became Camille's cruel line at the kitchen table. "I just think," Deborah said that evening, swirling wine she hadn't offered to refill for anyone else, "that weddings go smoother when everyone understands their role. Some family members are wonderful in small doses. Others thrive in the spotlight a bit more than the room can really hold." I had been sitting 3 feet away when Deborah said it. She wasn't looking at me directly. She didn't need to be. Some sentences are built to travel exactly as far as they're meant to. That one traveled straight into the space between my ribs and stayed there. I hadn't said anything that night either. I ate my dinner, complimented the host, drove home, told no one, not even Simone, exactly what had been said or how it had landed. I understood, sitting with it in the days after, that women like Deborah rarely made their meaning available for direct confrontation. It arrived instead in the shape of concern, of practicality, of a certain way things needed to look, phrases engineered to be indefensible if challenged, and unmistakable if you'd spent 54 years learning to hear them for what they were. I thought about all 4 of those encounters again on the drive to the venue that Saturday morning. radio off, windows cracked to let in the humid gray air. I wasn't driving toward this walkthrough angry at Deborah Whitfield specifically, not the way a person gets angry at one insult. I was carrying the accumulated weight of every version of that same sentence, heard across 54 years. Break rooms, waiting rooms. Once a hospital administrator 20 years into my career told me I was wonderful with the families, just wonderful. His tone made clear he meant it as the entire ceiling of what he expected from me. I was not going to let that ceiling apply to my own daughter's wedding, not after everything I'd built to make sure it never had to. I thought one more time about Walter's note in the toolbox. Keep your name on things, not because you don't trust people, because you love them enough to protect them from what they might become when money's involved. I understood now, more fully than ever, exactly what he'd meant by that. He hadn't only meant protecting me from outside threats, creditors, con men, careless institutions. He'd meant, I now believed, protecting the whole family, including whatever children or grandchildren came after, from the specific corrosion that happens when money moves without accountability. When love gets treated like an infinite resource that never requires honesty in return. Walter wanted my name on things so that when a moment like this one eventually arrived, and some moment like it always does in every family, there would be a clear, undeniable record of what actually happened. Rather than a fog of hurt feelings and competing memories, everyone could later reshape to their own comfort. Miss Odessa Pruitt, 2 doors down on Sunset Drive, had lived in Ardmore even longer than I had, 41 years, by her own count, long enough to remember when the neighborhood's covenant deeds still carried the old exclusionary language. Nobody bothered enforcing it anymore. Some families quietly still lived as though it were law. She was 81 years old, sharp as a tack. She watered her azaleas at 6 every morning, whether it rained the night before or not. Because, as she liked to say, a habit kept faithfully was worth more than a habit kept only when convenient. She caught me out on the porch that Thursday evening before the walkthrough, sitting alone with my tea. She crossed the yard between our 2 houses, the way she'd been crossing it for 2 decades whenever she sensed a neighbor needed company more than she needed to be asked for it. "You've had a face on you all week, Renata Ashby," Miss Odessa said, settling into the other porch chair without waiting for an invitation, which was itself a kind of invitation I had long ago learned to welcome. "Tell me what that girl did," I told her. I found myself telling the whole story more fully than I had to almost anyone else. The kitchen table, the caterer's contract, the salon. Deborah's careful sentences about a certain image, the $17,000, quietly diverted into an account I'd never known existed. Miss Odessa listened, hands folded in her lap, nodding at intervals. Her face gave away almost nothing until I reached the part about the shower, the pie. Surprisingly good for what it was. Miss Odessa said, a single syllable carrying the weight of 81 years of hearing that exact register more times than she could count. I know that woman's kind. Not her exactly. Her kind. I taught school in this county 38 years, Renata. I've had parents like that sit across a conference table from me, smiling the whole time, telling me how impressed they were that I spoke so well. Like speaking well was a surprise they hadn't planned for. "I know it," I said quietly. "You do know it. You've known it your whole life, same as me. The question isn't whether you know it. The question is what you're going to do about it this time, because you have grandchildren coming eventually, God willing, and they need to see what you do with it. I'm not trying to teach anybody a lesson, Miss Odessa. I'm just trying to protect what's mine. Baby, sometimes those are the same thing." Miss Odessa reached over and patted my knee, the same gesture she'd used the week Walter died. 17 years and countless small kindnesses ago. You raised that girl right. She got turned around somewhere between right and easy. The way young people do when somebody with a bigger house tells them easy is the same thing as better. You go to that walkthrough Saturday. You remind her gently that right is still right, even when it's inconvenient. That's the whole lesson. Everything else is just details. I sat with that a long moment, tea cooling in my hands, the last of the evening light fading behind the crepe myrtles that lined both our front yards. You know, Miss Odessa continued, I remember when your Walter first moved onto this street. Some of the old-timers weren't sure what to make of a black family buying into Ardmore. Even by then, even that late, your husband used to wave at every one of them, every single morning on his way to the plant. Rain or shine, whether they waved back or not. Took about a year before most of them started waving back on their own. He never made a speech about it. He just kept showing up decent, every day, until decency became the only response left available to people. I remember, I said, smiling despite myself, at the memory of Walter's relentless, cheerful mornings. That's the lesson your daughter needs too. Not a speech, just you, showing up decent every single day, until decency's the only response left available to her. You've been doing that 28 years, Renata. Saturday's just one more morning of it. Bigger stakes, same habit. I thought about that conversation the rest of the week, turning it over, the way I turned over most things worth keeping. I thought about it again Friday night, laying out my navy blazer, and once more, Saturday morning, on the drive to the venue, windows cracked, the humid gray sky pressing low over the highway. I was not driving to that walkthrough to punish my daughter, or to humiliate Deborah Whitfield, or to prove any point beyond the one Miss Odessa had already named for me. 2 nights before, I was driving to show up decent, the way Walter had shown up decent every morning of his working life. The way I myself had shown up decent through 30 years of night shifts, 19 years of choir practice, 28 years raising a daughter alone. And to let that decency, documented and undeniable, be the only response left available to anyone still trying to argue that my presence in a room needed managing. I reached the gravel lot at 8:55. I sat a moment, gathering myself, running through exactly what needed saying and exactly what didn't. Marcus arrived at 9, folder under his arm. Together we walked the gravel path toward the barn, past the staked white tents, past the crepe myrtles, toward a room where a coordinator's clipboard was about to falter, a daughter's face was about to drain of color, and a lifetime of quiet accounting was finally, calmly, about to come due. The venue sat 20 minutes outside Greensboro, a converted vineyard property, white tents already staked into the grass for the following weekend. The whole grounds smelled of cut lawn and fresh mulch. I pulled into the gravel lot at 8:55. 5 minutes ahead of Marcus Odom. I sat in my car a moment, taking in the place my daughter had chosen for the biggest day of her life, without once asking my opinion on a single detail. It was, I had to admit, beautiful. Rolling grass, a long allée of crepe myrtles, not unlike the ones on my own street. A restored barn converted into a reception hall, exposed beams, hanging string lights. I could see, standing there, exactly why Camille had wanted it. I could also see, plainly, that not $1 of the deposit that secured this place had come from anyone but me. Marcus arrived at 9 on the dot, folder under his arm, tie straight. The same calm efficiency he brought to every family matter he'd ever handled for me. Ready? I've been ready since Tuesday, I said. We walked up the gravel path together. The venue coordinator, a brisk young woman named Ashley Ferris, met us at the barn's wide double doors, clipboard in hand. Her tight, professional smile faltered slightly at the sight of Marcus's folder. "Ms. Ashby, I wasn't told you'd be joining us this morning. I'm the party responsible for the outstanding balance," I said. Calm, even. I believe that makes my attendance somewhat necessary. Camille was already inside, standing near the long farm table where the head chairs would go. Beside her, in a cream linen dress entirely too formal for a Saturday walkthrough, stood Deborah Whitfield, phone in hand, mid-sentence to Ashley about lighting. Camille's face went through 3 expressions in under 2 seconds when she saw me walk in. Surprise, panic, something that might, underneath it, have been relief, though she wasn't ready yet to admit that to herself. "Mom, what are you doing here?" "I was told there was a problem with the final payment," I said. "I came to help resolve it." Deborah turned, taking in me and Marcus both. Her smile did the particular thing smiles do when a person is recalibrating in real time. Who deserves how much courtesy? "Ms. Ashby. How lovely. We were just discussing the final layout with Ashley, keeping the day looking a certain way for our side of the family. But I'm sure your input is welcome too." "Our side of the family," I repeated. Quiet. Not a question. Just letting the phrase sit in the air a moment, the way you let a wrong number sit on a chart before correcting it. Deborah didn't seem to register the weight in my voice. She turned back to Ashley, lowering her tone only slightly. The register I now recognized from the salon, pitched to be overheard without technically being caught at it. "I just don't want it looking like a completely different kind of wedding. You understand. We've worked hard to build a certain image for Preston's family. I'd hate for people to get the wrong impression." Nobody in that barn needed Deborah to say the word out loud. It hung there anyway, in the space between her cream linen dress and my plain navy blazer, in the space between whose family had built which kind of money, generations back, in the space between what Deborah meant by a certain image and what everybody standing in that barn understood her to mean, without her ever once naming it. I felt something settle in my chest, cold and clear. Not rage exactly, something closer to certainty. I had spent 54 years being underestimated in exactly this register, softly, politely, in rooms where nobody would ever admit to what they'd just implied, if you asked them directly. I had learned a long time ago that the answer to that register was never volume, it was proof. "Marcus," I said, "would you read Clause 3, please?" Marcus stepped forward and opened his folder. Ashley Ferris's clipboard lowered an inch. Camille's face had gone very pale. "This is the conditional gift agreement, executed on October the 14th, Marcus said. His voice carried the flat, unhurried authority of a man who had read 100 documents into 100 rooms and never once needed to raise his voice to be heard. Signed by Camille Renee Ashby Whitfield and witnessed by myself as notary. Clause 3 reads as follows. Final installment release is expressly conditioned upon written confirmation that the donor, Renata Colleen Ashby, remains a named and invited guest at the ceremony and reception in question. Should this condition fail at any point prior to disbursement, the donor retains sole and unilateral authority to cancel any outstanding instrument tied to this agreement." The barn was very quiet. Somewhere outside, a landscaping crew's mower started up. Then, mercifully, cut off again. As of this past Monday, Marcus continued. Ms. Ashby was informed by her daughter that she would not be attending the wedding. That condition failed. Ms. Ashby, acting entirely within her legal rights under this agreement, placed a hold on the outstanding $38,000 balance pending resolution. "You can't do that," Deborah said, sharp now, the polite register cracking for the first time. The vendors have contracts. There are deposits already committed. The vendors have contracts with Ms. Ashby's account, Marcus said, unbothered. Every deposit, every installment, every dollar in this wedding's budget has come from an account in her name, released under an agreement her daughter signed, an agreement her daughter's fiancé's family was never party to. I'm sorry to say, Mrs. Whitfield, that your side of the family's opinion on the layout, while I'm sure it's valued, has no bearing on who is legally entitled to authorize that final release. Camille found her voice at last, thin and shaking. Mom, please, you can't do this 3 days before my wedding. I looked at my daughter a long moment, not with anger, though the anger was there, banked low the way it had been banked low for 4 days now. Mostly what I felt, looking at Camille's stricken face, was something closer to grief. The particular grief of watching your child become, for one unguarded moment, a smaller version of herself than you know she's capable of being. I'm not doing anything to your wedding, Camille, I said, quiet. I didn't cancel anything. I simply told the bank not to release funds automatically until I knew whether my name was still on the list of people welcome to attend. That's all Clause 3 has ever said. You signed it. You had 8 months to read past the first page. I didn't think it would ever matter. That's exactly the problem, I said. You didn't think it would matter whether your mother was actually there? You thought the money would just keep coming regardless. Deborah tried again, brisker now, reaching for the tone of a woman used to smoothing over inconvenient facts with charm. Ashley, surely there's some flexibility here. We can work out payments separately, can't we, while the family sorts out its own matters. Ashley Ferris, to her credit, did not flinch. Mrs. Whitfield, our contract names Ms. Ashby as the financially responsible party. Without her signature releasing the balance, I'm not able to guarantee the barn, the tents, or the catering staff for Saturday. I can hold the date open for 48 hours while this is resolved. That's the most I'm authorized to offer. Deborah's mouth opened, then closed again. For the first time since I had met her, 4 months and exactly 4 occasions ago, Deborah Whitfield appeared to have run out of a register to reach for. I turned to my daughter, Camille. I am not trying to burn your wedding down. I am trying to make sure that whoever gets married in 3 days does it as a family that respects every person who built it. Not just the ones whose money happens to be easy to spend and easy to forget where it came from. Camille's eyes were wet now. For once, she didn't try to hide it behind her phone or her too bright voice. I didn't mean it the way it sounded, Mom. I panicked. Deborah kept saying things about how the day needed to look. I just wanted it to go smoothly. I thought, you thought I'd absorb it, I said gently. No accusation in it. Just fact, laid plain the way I laid every fact plain. Like I've absorbed most things for 28 years. I understand why you thought that. I built that expectation myself, being quiet all this time. I'm telling you now so you hear it clearly, once. That expectation ends today. Preston arrived 11 minutes later than everyone else, jogging up the gravel path, tie already loose around his collar. He'd driven straight from a dress fitting he'd cut short. The moment his mother texted him, there was, in her words, a situation at the venue. He walked into the barn mid-silence, mid-tension. He took one look at his mother's face, his fiancé's tear-streaked cheeks, and understood immediately. Whatever this was, it had already been building for longer than a single morning. "What's going on?" he said. "Your fiancé's mother is trying to hold our wedding hostage," Deborah said, sharp before anyone else could answer, over a guest list disagreement. Mother. Preston's voice carried a weight I hadn't heard from him before. Not in any of our 4 brief prior meetings. Not even Thursday, on the phone, when he'd apologized so earnestly it had moved me. Did you tell Camille that Ms. Ashby needed to stay home from the wedding? Deborah's chin lifted a fraction. I suggested that some family dynamics are easier to manage from a distance. I never told anyone to ban anybody. That's not what Camille told me you said. Preston, this isn't the time. It's exactly the time, Preston said. I watched something shift in the room, some balance of power finally rearranging itself, along lines that had nothing to do with money and everything to do with a young man deciding, in front of everyone, which family he actually intended to belong to. Camille told me Wednesday night, crying, that you'd been telling her for weeks how the wedding needed to look a certain way, how Ms. Ashby's presence would be, and I'm quoting you directly, Mother, a lot for people to process. Camille didn't come up with that idea on her own. You planted it. Deborah's mouth opened, then closed, exactly the way it had closed a moment earlier when Ashley Ferris refused to bend on the payment schedule. She looked, for the first time since I had known her, genuinely uncertain of her footing. I only ever wanted what's best for this family, Deborah said. Quieter now. This family, Preston said, includes Ms. Ashby. It's included her since the day I asked Camille to marry me. It's going to keep including her long after this wedding, whether it happens Saturday or 3 months from now once everyone's calmed down and told the truth to each other. I'd rather it happen 3 months from now than happen on a lie. Camille had been silent through most of this, wiping at her face with the back of one hand. Now she finally spoke, her voice small, in a way I hadn't heard since she was a little girl afraid of thunderstorms. Mom, I'm sorry. I should have told her no the first time she said it. I should have told her no every time after that, too. I let her keep saying it because it was easier than fighting the woman my whole future in-law family revolves around. That's not an excuse. I know it's not, but it's the truth. I looked at my daughter a long moment. The anger I'd carried all week, banked low but real, did not disappear entirely. It rarely does. Not all at once. Not for something this deep. But something in me softened, watching Camille finally say the true thing out loud instead of the easy thing. There's one more matter, I said, turning to Marcus. Clause 5. Camille's face, already pale, went a shade paler. Mom, please, I can explain the car. I know about the car, Camille, I said gently. Preston told me. I'm not here to punish you over it. You needed help. You were too proud or too scared or too caught up trying to look like a family with everything handled to simply ask me directly. I've told you your whole life you're allowed to ask me for things. I meant it then. I mean it now. Then why bring up Clause 5 at all? Because I want it on the record, not for a courtroom, for you. So that when you're a wife, and eventually, God willing, a mother yourself, you remember exactly what it cost, once, to solve a problem by hiding it instead of naming it. I'm not angry about the money, Camille. $17,000 is nothing compared to 28 years. I'm heartbroken that you thought hiding it from me was safer than trusting me with the truth. Camille began crying in earnest now, no longer bothering to wipe her face. Preston crossed the room to stand beside her, one hand steady on her back. I turned to my daughter. That's the only thing I want from today, Camille. Not an apology performed for the room. Your actual word that I'm invited to my own daughter's wedding as myself. Seated wherever the family sits. Introduced without apology or qualification to anyone, including Preston's mother. Of course, Camille said immediately. Then, seeming to hear how quickly and easily she'd said it, she added, slower, more deliberate, Mom, of course. I want you there. I've wanted you there the whole time. I just let somebody talk me into believing. Wanting you there and wanting things to look a certain way couldn't both be true at once. They can. They always could. I looked at Marcus. Marcus nodded once, closed his folder. I'll have the release paperwork ready within the hour. Deborah said nothing further. She stood near the farm table, arms crossed now, watching her son's arms still steady around Camille's back, watching a family reassemble itself around a truth she had spent weeks trying to keep buried under the word optics. Whatever she was thinking, she kept it, for once, entirely to herself. Ashley Ferris cleared her throat gently that morning, once the release paperwork was settled, clipboard still in hand, clearly aware she'd just witnessed something well beyond the scope of any walkthrough she'd ever conducted. Ms. Ashby, for what it's worth, and I recognize it's not really my place to say this, but I've coordinated probably 400 weddings in this barn. I have never once seen a family sort through something this honestly, this early, before the day itself. Whatever you all decide going forward, I think that's worth naming. She exhaled, visibly relieved. I'll hold the vendor confirmations and keep everything on schedule for Saturday. The wedding happened, in the end, exactly on schedule. The following Saturday, under the same white tents that had stood staked into the grass the week before. By then, the humid gray sky had cleared into the kind of bright, cloudless June afternoon photographers dream about and rarely get. I sat in the second row, not the first. I'd told Camille plainly I didn't need the front seat, only a seat that was mine without qualification. I wore a soft champagne-colored dress, bought specifically for the occasion, not the navy blazer I'd worn into battle the Saturday before. I sat with Simone on one side, Reverend Whitaker on the other, whom Camille had specially invited once she learned how much he'd helped me through the week. Camille walked down the aisle on Preston's father's arm, since her own father had been gone 17 years, and there was no substitute for that particular absence. But she paused halfway down, unscripted. She crossed to the second row long enough to kiss my cheek and whisper something only I could hear. Then she continued on. The ceremony proceeded exactly the way ceremonies do. Vows exchanged, rings placed. A kiss that drew the expected applause. Deborah Whitfield sat in the front row on the groom's side, composed. Gracious in public, the particular way people like Deborah are always gracious in public. If anyone in that tent knew the full shape of what had happened 7 days earlier, they gave no outward sign of it. I hadn't expected an apology from Deborah, and none came. Not that day. Not directly. What came instead, weeks later, was smaller, and in its own way more honest. A card in the mail, no note beyond a single line. Thank you for making sure this family started off telling the truth to itself. Signed simply D. I kept that card. I still have it, tucked now inside the same manila folder in the hall closet, alongside Marcus's original agreement and Walter's note from the toolbox. 3 documents that together told the whole story of a family that had nearly broken and instead, at the last possible moment, chose not to. The $17,000 from the car never became a court matter, never became anything beyond what it had always actually been. A mother's gift her daughter had been too proud to admit she'd needed help spending honestly. Camille paid a portion of it back over the following year anyway, unprompted. Small monthly transfers I never asked for and never refused. I understood my daughter needed to make that gesture for her own sake, more than I needed the money returned. Yolanda Briggs, at the bank, mentioned something to me a few weeks after the wedding, something that stayed with me longer than almost anything else from that whole ordeal. I had stopped in to update my beneficiary designations, a routine piece of paperwork, nothing urgent. While we waited on a printer, Yolanda said quietly, almost as an aside, "You know, Ms. Ashby, You're not the first client I've had who's been erased from something they built by a family managing optics. I've seen it 3 times just this year. Mothers, mostly. Women who did everything right and got quietly written out of the picture the moment somebody decided they didn't fit whatever image was being sold that week. Did they all fight it the way I did? No, Yolanda said. Most of them didn't have a document like yours. Most of them didn't know they were allowed to protect themselves that way. I've started telling people about clause structures like yours more often now, honestly, since your case. It shouldn't take a lawyer and a manila folder to make sure a mother gets to stay in the room. But until the rest of the world catches up, I'm glad you had both. I thought about that conversation a long time afterward. I thought about all the women who'd come before me, in break rooms and hospital hallways and church parking lots. Women who'd absorbed a version of what almost happened to me without ever having Walter's careful advice, without a lawyer in the family, without the exact combination of numbers and quiet resolve that let me walk into that barn and lay the truth on a table rather than simply swallow it. The way I'd been taught, by circumstance and history both, that women who looked like me were supposed to swallow things. I thought, too, about Ashley, who called me a month after the wedding, unprompted, to say the venue had quietly started, including a line in its contracts, recommending couples discuss financial responsibility and guest list authority in writing before signing. A small procedural change, one that traced its origin, whether the venue's ownership fully realized it or not, to one Saturday morning walkthrough that had nearly ended a wedding before it saved one. It was a small thing, a single clause in a single contract at a single venue outside Greensboro. I understood better than most that most real change arrives exactly that small. One contract, one family, one quiet correction at a time, long before it ever shows up in a headline or a policy. Reverend Whitaker mentioned something similar from the pulpit that autumn, without using my name. A sermon about the difference between keeping peace and keeping silence, about how a family, a church, a whole community could mistake one for the other for generations, if nobody was brave enough to draw the line between them out loud. I sat in my usual pew, third row, choir robe folded on my lap for the afternoon service to come. I felt Simone's hand find mine partway through, the two of us listening together to a message that both of us understood, without needing to say so. Had my own kitchen table quietly folded somewhere inside it. Miss Odessa Pruitt, hearing the whole story eventually, the full version, nodded slowly on her own porch one evening. Decent. Every single day. Bigger stakes. Same habit. Told you so, Renata Ashby. I laughed. Really laughed. For the first time in what felt like weeks. There was nothing left to say to that except that my 81-year-old neighbor had, once again, been entirely right. I started, in a small way, doing something about it myself. I began mentioning clause structures like mine to the younger women in my choir, the ones getting married or planning to someday, not as a lecture, never a lecture, just a quiet aside after rehearsal some evenings. Keep your name on things, baby. Not because you don't trust the people you love, because you love them enough to protect everyone from what money can turn people into, even for a little while, even people who love you back. Beatrice teased me about it once, over coffee. You're turning into a one-woman financial ministry, Renata Ashby. I just laughed and said somebody had to be. Nobody had told me, at 26, widowed with a baby on my hip, that love needed structure to survive a hard year. I figured the least I could do, all these years later, was tell the next generation of women coming up through that choir loft exactly what Gerald Simpkins had once told me on a porch step. Free of charge, no casserole dish required. Simone finished her nursing program the following spring. She took a position, fittingly, on the pediatric floor at Forsyth Medical, the same floor I had worked for 30 years before her. On her first day, I drove her there myself, the way I'd once driven Camille to her own first day of kindergarten. I sat in the parking lot afterward a long while, thinking about the particular, quiet architecture of a life well built, brick by brick, decade by decade, one careful decision at a time, until it finally held. Camille and Preston moved into a modest house not far from Sunset Drive the following autumn, close enough that I saw my daughter most Sundays. Close enough that when Camille had her first child 3 years later, a daughter she named Renata Odessa, after both me and Miss Odessa Pruitt in the same breath, I was in the delivery room within the hour, exactly where I was supposed to be, exactly where nobody would ever again suggest I didn't belong. 3 days after the wedding, once the tents had come down, once the last thank you cards had gone out, once the house on Sunset Drive had gone quiet again in its familiar way, Simone came by for Sunday dinner. Same as she always had. She found me on the back porch, the light going gold over the tomato vines Walter had planted 17 years before. "You seem lighter, Auntie," Simone said, settling into the chair beside me. "I am lighter," I said. I didn't realize how much I was carrying until I finally set a little of it down. Simone was quiet a moment, watching the light move through the leaves, the way she'd watched it move through them as a little girl, on this same porch, summers ago, before nursing school, before any of this. "Can I ask you something? Why didn't you just yell at her, that first day, at the kitchen table?" Most people would have. I thought about that question a long while before I answered. The way I thought about most things worth answering honestly. "Because yelling would have made it about my feelings in that moment," I said finally. And this was never about my feelings in that moment. It was about who gets to decide whether I'm in the room, in every room, for the rest of my life. You don't win that by getting loud, Simone. You win it by making sure the paperwork already knows the answer before anybody else does. Simone smiled. She reached over and squeezed my hand, the same way she had that first Sunday, weeks before, when this had all begun. Out past the fence line, the tomato vines kept climbing, the way they always had, needing almost nothing from anyone to keep doing exactly what they were built to do. "It was never about the wedding," I said quietly, watching the last of the light fade behind the crepe myrtles. "It was about who gets to decide." The porch light came on, warm and steady, the same bulb Walter had installed with his own hands decades before. Neither of us said anything more. We didn't need to. Some victories don't ask for speeches. They just ask you to sit still on your own porch, in your own house, under a light a good man wired for you, and let the evening prove the point. I sipped my tea. Simone hummed something low, one of her mother's old church songs, and the vines kept climbing,